Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in today. Welcome to It's Time for More Injury Funding, the podcast for all who want to learn about legal funding and its significance in the personal injury, product liability, medical malpractice, and many other types of law practice domains. I'm your host, Laura, founder and CEO of More Injury Funding, the legal funding counselors with passion for law, medicine, legal funding, and heart for all suffering individuals. More Injury Funding is a sponsor, member, associate, or business partner of this podcast, Academy of Truck Accident Attorneys, Sandy Springs Bar Association, Georgia Association of Paralegals, Atlanta Legal Aid Society, State Bar of Georgia, and Georgia Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. In today's episode, I have a special guest, Tom Graham with Mausner Graham Injury Law, PLLC, based in Miami, Florida, and New York, by appointment only in the second one. Even though we are in the first quarter of 2024 and enjoying the winter time now, spring and summer will be here in no time. And this will be the time of the year where families take vacations, go to the lakes, rivers, enjoy activities at the beach, and spend a significant amount of time near water. With that comes joy of boating, taking cruise ship vacations, and doing various activities surrounding water, in as much as this is an extremely pleasant and relaxing way to spend time with the loved ones. It can quickly become dangerous and devastating if some laws and regulations are overseen or ignored. Attorney Thomas Graham will talk about a highly specialized and complex field of law practice, and that is the maritime law. He will touch on some aspects of boating, cruise ships, and related injuries. At the end of our episode, I'll have a fun pop-up question for our guest, Tom, today, so stay tuned in. You, my dear listeners and viewers, are in for a treat today. Welcome to It's Time for More Injury Funding podcast, Tom.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it, and it's a pleasure to be here.
Wonderful. Let's start our discussion about your firm. Over the years, you have represented maritime accident claims, big and small, from cruise ships to jet skis. How long have you been on one of the managing partners at Mausner Graham Injury Law?
So we're a relatively newer firm. We started about 2 years ago. I've been doing personal injury for quite some time now. In fact, I've been doing personal injury basically my entire career, except for my first 3 years, I was a prosecutor, which was very interesting. And I quickly realized that I love the maritime and I love the admiralty cases. So I've kind of made that into my niche because I'm very passionate about it.
And what types of law besides maritime law do you practice with your law partners, Eric Mausner and Brett Baker?
So we do all types of personal injury and wrongful death cases. We'll do anything as simple as a car accident, someone hit by a car, a slip and fall, but we'll also do more complex cases. I do medical malpractice, and I really enjoy that. And as you know, I love the maritime, and I do a significant amount of maritime.
And how many percent of that is maritime law, including boating, cruise ships, and jet skis legal claims?
Of my practice, I would say it's about 40% of it, and it's growing. And I like it so much, I wouldn't mind if it was 100% of it. It's a really interesting niche.
Okay. And why are you considered one of the best in the country for handling maritime law and related cases?
Well, that's a very flattering question. I really appreciate you saying so. I think there's a number of factors, but it boils down to what I would call almost an obsession with this area of law. Every day I'm checking the updates to see if there's a legal update. I was very fortunate that I started off actually doing a little bit of defense work with a great mentor, a fantastic attorney who represented a lot of the cruise lines. So I kind of got to see an inside view of that, but I knew that I wanted to specialize in plaintiff work. Since that time, I've handled almost every type of maritime accident or death you can imagine, a lot of different factual situations. So it's a mixture of having experience in a wide array of these types of cases, doing it for a number of years now, being, I think, really eager to learn and hungry to learn and try out new theories, figure out how to make these cases work, and just seeing it. And also, I have to admit, geographically, I think it's a blessing that I live in Miami, right? For a lot of reasons. Florida is the boating capital of the world. So we see a ton of recreational boating, incidents, deaths, injuries. But more importantly for my practice and my development as a maritime attorney, if you would look right out my window here, I'm looking at the port of Miami. There's 5 to 10 cruise ships here, in and out every single day. And the cruise lines are headquartered here. Most of them are headquartered here in Miami. So for that reason, if a lawsuit is going to be filed and it's a cruise line incident, there's actually something in the ticket. When you purchase a vacation to go on a cruise, you sign a ticket contract. And part of that contract, there's a paragraph or a provision in there that says, if you bring a lawsuit, you have to do it in the Southern District of Florida for most of the cruise lines. So for instance, if a family from Ohio comes on vacation and something bad happens, their lawsuit will be filed here. So it's naturally where I began my practice and where I live. And it's just so happens this is our backyard where you have to file the suits. So for that reason, I've had the good fortune of doing a lot of them, and building relationships along the way, letting people know that I love this. And I have a lot of relationships from doing this so long with the cruise lines. So I kind of know what they're going to be looking for. I usually know a lot of the attorneys that will be handling the claims. So it's been that perfect storm, so to speak, of background, experience, and interest that's allowed me to make this my niche.
It's wonderful. And since you're based and practice in the state of Florida, what are the common causes of boating accidents in Florida? I presume they may be very similar to those, let's say, like in Georgia or any other coastal states on the east or west of the U.S.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that probably the causes are the same no matter where you are in the world, largely the same. So I'll answer the question, but before I do, a little bit of, I guess, perspective. I think of maritime. I kind of break it down. Is this a cruise line case or is this a recreation case, right? And then below that, is it involving a passenger or does it involve a crew member? So it's very niche, and I think that's important that you have to analyze it through a lens that's not always cookie cutter or one size fits all. But to answer your question more directly, about boating accidents, and Florida is a massive boating state, I would say the number one cause of boating accidents, if you're thinking like a collision, would be either operator inexperience. So you get someone on a boat that doesn't really know what they're doing or doesn't know how to safely operate the boat, and they don't have a good lookout. They don't watch where they're going. It's very similar to driving in that regard. So for boating and recreational boating, I think that's what it would be. Inexperience, you're not watching what you're doing. Alcohol on these personal watercrafts, alcohol can play a really big role in it. But that's typically the three main factors that I think lead to something bad happening. And every year, sadly, at least a couple times a year, here in South Florida, we will hear of someone's not paying attention and they hit their boat into the rocks and something awful happens, or they hit into a navigational beacon or a dock and something bad happens. So that's a very common fact pattern if you're thinking of a collision, a boating collision, right? And there are actually rules of navigation that apply when you're on navigable waterways, very similar also to driving. So there's things you should be doing. And with my friends and my clients and my loved ones, I always tell them, if you really want to get into boating, it is a smart idea to find someone that does it a lot, that's kind of a professional, and take some lessons with them and even learn about the waterways near where you're going to be going, because it can be tricky. I mean, even if you don't cause an injury or a death, you can get yourself in a lot of trouble if you get into too shallow of water or get somewhere unsafe. So yeah, I think there's nothing better in the world than boating, but you got to know what you're doing.
That's a great advice. What types of injuries are commonly seen in boat accidents?
Sure. So it really runs the gamut. For boat accidents, and again, when I hear the word boat, I'm thinking more smaller inlet, like, maybe in the intercoastal or not going super far out. But I will tell you, for boating accidents, what we'll see a lot is falls, because you get out there, it's a wet surface. The boat's rocking around on waves. Maybe the driver's going faster than they should be. So we see a lot of falls. We see a lot of injuries that will occur because of negligent maneuvering of the boat, where a captain won't take a wave right. I mean, I've had a lot of cases where, no exaggeration, people get thrown in the air by a big wave or wake and they get knocked down. I have sued other boat drivers for creating a dangerous wake and hurting passengers in a smaller vessel. So you're going to see a lot of things like that, falls and sort of just collisions with the boat itself. Boats that are what's called unseaworthy, so they really aren't safe for someone to get in and out. Boats that are unsafe and you can't really get in safely. So maybe they're lacking a handle. Maybe there's not a good non-skid surface for them to safely step in the boat. It could be other things, maybe even more basic, such as take, for instance, not enough crew. there's not enough crew, or an operator goes out in really bad weather and the boat capsizes. It really runs the gamut, and it all depends on the facts. And then sort of how I said I think about these things as smaller boats or cruise lines or yachts. For the cruise line cases, that's where it can become really fascinating because those things are floating cities or floating casinos, right? It's like you take a little part of Las Vegas and you put it out in the Atlantic. So anything that you can imagine that could happen on land and worse can happen on a cruise ship. We see, again, a lot of falls because the ship's moving. Oftentimes the people going on vacation, they're not super familiar with the layout. It can be dark in certain places. You can have single step change in elevation, which is basically just like a step or a drop off that they don't see and they fall. That happens more than you would know. A lot of slip and falls on wet floors. You can have on the cruise ships a little bit more cases that I feel super strongly about. Surprisingly enough, there are a lot of sexual assaults and crimes that occur on the cruise ships. You wouldn't really think that, but that's a very sadly more common than you would like to know it happens. In fact, they keep statistics on some of the sex assaults. So to prepare to talk with you today, I looked at some of them and just pulled a period from October 1st of 2022 through December 31st of 2022. There were 36 reports of sexual assaults on cruise lines during just that small period. And actually, the FBI investigates most of those, and the US government keeps statistics on it if anyone's interested. But you see, those types of crimes occur on the cruise ships. You see medical malpractice. So these cruise ships have small emergency rooms, sort of like an urgent care or emergency room where you can get basic treatment and emergency treatment. And oftentimes the doctors in those medical centers will make big mistakes. They'll miss something, or for instance, someone is having a stroke, the initial signs of a stroke, they don't get them off quick enough, or a heart attack. So we see a lot of different types of fact patterns that lead to injury and death on the cruise lines. There are challenging cases, but I feel really strongly about them for a lot of reasons.
Tom, can a personal injury lawyer help an injured person, a plaintiff with a boating accident claim, or is it better from the plaintiff's perspective to talk to a boating attorney like yourself, who has an extensive experience in this field of law?
Sure. So the really short answer is yes, a personal injury attorney could conceivably help someone that's in a boating accident, but it could get really, really dicey for them if they don't know what they're doing. I would say this is not an area of law you want to dabble in. If you don't do it with some regularity, there are a lot of differences, a lot of changes, really from start to end. There are a lot of different considerations you need to take. So I think if you get a call, if you're an attorney and you get a call about a boating accident or a cruise line accident or death, you should find someone that has a specialty in this, because they're going to know exactly what to do, what to look for, how to assess the case, get that case selection right, and set up the case and do it correctly to get a good result for the client. I will tell you, a couple times a year, I'll get a call from someone, from the Northeast, and one of their past clients went on a cruise vacation and fell and broke their hip, something like that, hypothetically. Mm-hmm. And I'll get a call from an attorney from the Northeast, and they'll say, hey, I have this case. I wrote a letter to the cruise line, and they haven't gotten back to me. I don't know what to do. It happened 18 months ago. And I'll sort of freeze up and feel really bad for that attorney that's calling me, because they don't know it, but they've already committed malpractice. Because at least with the cruise line cases, how I mentioned at the very beginning of our interview, there's a contract that governs. One of the things you agree to is a shortened statute of limitations. That's the time period for which you can bring your claim. And in a cruise line case, for instance, that's 1 year. If you don't do this a lot and you're thinking, I have, whatever my state tort statute of limitations is to get to this, and you wait 18 months, 2 years, you're already too late and you've lost the case for your client. So that's one small example why I think it would really be smart, if you don't do a lot of this or want to do a lot of this, to send it to someone who does, if you get a look, or at least team with them or call them. I mean, I'd be happy to talk to anyone who wants to do one of these cases, and I would encourage them to. But everything from the timelines, some of the theories of liability, where you can file the complaint, the types of damages available, it's really all different in maritime. It's not going to be the same, largely going to not be the same as your state court law that will apply. There are a lot of nuances.
Very interesting. So that 1 year of limitations is only applicable in Florida or nationwide? when it comes to maritime?
That's a very good question. Just to back up a little bit, federal maritime law, it's sort of comprised of different things, right? One of them is there's actually federal legislation. So there's federal laws that govern a maritime claim on the books. Under the federal law, the typical statute of limitations for a maritime claim is 3 years, okay? But like I said, with that ticket contract for the cruise line, it becomes 1 year. You contractually agree to shorten it. So it kind of depends on a case-by-case factual basis. If you're going to do these claims, you need to do your due diligence up front, get that ticket contract, and figure out what's going to apply. So I can't really give you a straight answer because it could come from a mixture of different laws, and you would need to analyze the case, to make sure that maritime law would apply. If it's some gray area and you're not sure, so you knew it 100% when you have to file the thing.
That makes sense. Now, let's shift our focus to cruise ships specifically. Many of us enjoy and organize repeat vacations on various cruise ship lines, but as all of us know, sometimes things don't go as planned. We can what can specifically go wrong on a cruise ship? And I'm not talking Titanic movie here.
Right. So yeah, of course, like I said, they are basically floating resorts or floating casinos out there in the ocean. In 2023, I think there were about 31 or 32 million passengers that went on cruises. So it's a large volume of people on these ships, and anything you can imagine really can go wrong. I would say I'll kind of rank them in what is the most common that we hear, and I'll give you, an array. But the most common is going to be a premises liability type case. Someone trips and falls, someone slips and falls, a handle breaks on a stairway and they fall. Those types of things, those types of land-based kind of premises liability issues. Anything you can see on the land with those pretty much happens at sea, and oftentimes a lot worse. So that would be probably the number one in volume is fall cases, right? Under that, though, you have a lot of cases that are like negligent security. How I mentioned earlier, the intentional torts, the sexual assaults, that happens with kind of shocking regularity. You have cases involving over-service of alcohol. So these cruise lines actually have internal policies and procedures that will govern what the bartenders are supposed to do. So how they're supposed to serve people. And it's actually this system that's like red, yellow, green. You're supposed to kind of watch the patrons, and if they look like they're becoming too intoxicated, stop giving them alcohol. I mean, you can imagine people go on these cruises, they tend to drink a lot or over drink, and bad things can happen. So overservice of alcohol can lead to falls or lead to those types of injuries. It leads to bar fights. If you don't have a sufficient security presence, that's another theory of negligent security. People fall overboard. A lot of times people drink too much, they fall overboard, or they climb on the rails, they fall overboard. Again, like I mentioned, medical malpractice happens really regularly. And in fact, I'm very into those cases. Those are some of my favorite types of maritime cases. And then every cruise vacation, one of the most major components of going to each port is what's called a shore excursion. So getting off the ship, getting on the island, and doing something fun with your family and friends. I mean, that's a big revenue producer for the cruise lines, the shore excursions. And it can be anything from you go off a day at the beach, or, horseback riding, riding an ATV, zip lining, exploring caves, hiking, any of those things you can do in these beautiful islands. The cruise lines will offer these tours, these shore excursions. But what they don't tell you is the people running these tours, they aren't actually, it's not the cruise line running it. It's a third party, an independent contractor. So we see a lot of things that go wrong because these foreign tour providers, they're not really, up to the same accreditation or safety standards you'd see here in the United States. So people get hurt on those a lot. And the shore excursion cases are their own animal, completely very challenging and very fact specific. But that's kind of a very high level overview of anything that can go wrong on a cruise ship. And I didn't even mention crew member. So the crew members get hurt all the time. It's a dangerous job. They work very hard. And that's another facet of maritime litigation. That would actually be, if it's a cruise line crew member, it would be an arbitration. It wouldn't be a filed lawsuit. As part of their employment contracts and their collective bargaining, they agree to arbitrate any claims of injury or death. So hopefully that answers. I mean, I could probably talk to you all day long about the different types of cases I've seen, but it can range from anything as simple as someone slipping on a tortilla to something as sad as a little kid, a railing is improperly designed and it allows a little kid to peer over and the child falls and dies, to over medication or under medication in the medical center leading to death, failure to diagnose a stroke, failure to diagnose a heart attack, products liability. So we'll have cases where there are attractions, rides, amusements on these ships. Something goes wrong on one of them. It's really interesting and it can be quite diverse, which is part of the reason why I love these cases.
Fascinating. Now, can a cruise ship, boating, or jet ski accident victim hold at the at-fault party responsible for the medical expenses?
Yes, they certainly can. So again, maritime law, the types of damages or claims that might be available could vary. It might not be the same as land-based, but broadly speaking, that is always a compensable damage, would be the medical expenses. And you can get compensation for your economic damages as well as non-economic. So the pain and suffering, typically for passenger claims. So for the passenger cruise line claims, there's a wide array of damages. But there's a special caveat that's kind of surprising and really quite sad. If someone dies at sea, so passes away at sea, and there's actually a law directly on the books for this. If someone passes away at sea beyond a certain amount of miles, it's either 3 miles, depending on where you are, or the boundaries of the state waters, you cannot get pain and suffering damages. There's a law called the Death on the High Seas Act. It's an ancient law. Really, at this point in society, I find it completely unfair and not necessary. But if a loved one dies at sea, you probably cannot get pain and suffering unless the facts are very specific. Basically, if you can make an argument that it didn't occur beyond the border of where death on the high seas kicks in. But it's a harsh law. A couple of times a year at least, I'll have to tell someone that I really can't help you because the level of damages will be so small if you can't get recovery for that pain and suffering. It's a hard conversation to have and a really harsh law. But that's another example of how maritime is so specific, right? An attorney that doesn't do this regularly might imagine if someone died on a cruise ship in the Bahamas, that could be a super high value case if it happened here on land, but that might not actually be true. Given that damage limitation, it can really cut them down.
Can you talk to us about Florida jet ski accident laws and provide some statistics from top of your head? Just kind of in summarized version of it.
Sure. So I don't remember if I mentioned this, but in Florida, we're one of the boating capitals. So there are, I think, 1 million registered boats in Florida, and there are about 170, last I checked, 170,000 registered personal watercraft, so jet skis, and that's registered. If you ever visit Miami, you'll quickly learn a lot of people probably aren't really registering their jet ski, but there are a bunch of injuries that I see every year on jet skis, and it's a lot of collisions. And it goes back to what I first said, operator error or someone that doesn't know what they're doing. If we would drive over right now to Miami Beach, you would see a bunch of places that rent out jet skis for vacationers, for tourists to go and take it out for the day in the bay, right? And there is a law in Florida, it's called the livery statute. It's basically a special law and a special term that means if you're going to rent out watercraft or boats, you need to give a briefing, like a safety and operation briefing, so that the person has instruction on how to safely do it. And candidly, we see that is often screwed up. So a lot of the people that rent out these jet skis won't really follow the laws in place and won't tell people how to safely use them. So that's one way that you can advance a claim if someone rents a jet ski. Now, if there's a jet ski collision that you caused yourself, might not be able to help you. If someone else ran into you, you could try to sue them, but you might have an insurance, a collectability issue. Does that person have insurance? So it's a detailed analysis up front, but you can do those types of cases, and we see them oftentimes. Operator error, people going way too fast, speeding. They don't know where they're going, so they hit something. They're not paying attention. They're very dangerous if you don't know what you're doing, or you're being risky, or you're drinking and driving.
Awesome. Can you list some of the most common types of jet ski accident injuries?
Yeah. So a very interesting question, actually. I would say that by and large, the number one most common one would be a collision. So someone, either two jet skis, people drive into each other, happens more than you would think, or they hit, like I said, maybe they hit a buoy or they hit a dock or they go into too shallow of water. So a traditional collision would definitely be number one. Sometimes you will see, it's really sad, but people will get out there and they don't really know how to swim, and maybe they fall off. And if they're not wearing a life preserver, we've seen people drown. There's actually a number of products liability cases involving jet skis. If they're designed dangerously, there's a number of bad things that can happen. It's actually pretty shocking, but you see some of those jet skis. I don't know if you've seen them in operation. On the back side, they have like a powerful stream of water that shoots out as part of the operation of it. So it shoots up water. And there are a lot of products liability cases where people, when they're falling off, get hit by that extremely powerful stream of water and really badly injured. I know there was a string of cases against Kawasaki for that product liability defect. That is something that is super technical and pretty niche, but it's just an example of the wide range of types of cases available under maritime law.
Very interesting. What are the main steps to follow after a jet ski or a personal watercraft accident?
So number one would obviously be get somewhere safe, make sure you're safe, you're taken care of, the passenger, the person you're with, they're safe. I would say move out of the way to a safe location, obviously. Then you're going to want to call the police right away if there's an injury, or EMS. There are certain laws in place. If you are in a boating collision, there are certain reporting requirements that you need to call Coast Guard or Florida Wildlife right away. After that, I would say, obviously take care of the medical situation. You're going to want to take photographs if you can. That always helps. If you rented the vessel or the watercraft, put the person you rented it from on notice. Get their name, their information, get their insurance information if you can. Get the full names of all the witnesses. Get details about the vessel. So we'll get a lot of calls and we'll say, well, you rented a boat from where? And they'll give us a name, and then we'll try to get in touch with the person that they rented it from, the livery, and they'll be like, we have 10 boats. Which one was it? We don't know. We don't have records. So take a lot of details down. Get the name of the boat. There will be a hull identification number. Get that. Take photos of it. So just that sort of fact finding. If you're not injured and you have the availability to do the fact finding, if you're helping someone out, that would be the most efficient way to preserve your claim. And then get in touch with an attorney right away so we can get our own investigators out there, get the letters that we need to get out to get things started, make sure that evidence is preserved. That would be it in a nutshell.
Okay. So overall, how and in what way does maritime law differ from other fields of law practices?
So it can be very, very different. Like I mentioned at the onset, even the statute of limitations might be shortened or different. It's its own body of federal common law. So everything from the theories of liability to the different types of damages, it's going to be its own body of common law that's different from land-based law. So you need to really understand it and be skilled at it to know what applies and to know what to look for to advance your case successfully.
Are you yourself, Tom, a boating, cruise ship, vacation, or jet ski enthusiast?
So good question. Never been on a cruise. I've been on a lot of cruise ships, but only to do inspections when something bad happens. I've never went on a cruise vacation. I've done jet skis. I used to like them a lot more when I was younger. Now I really find them kind of fun for about 2 minutes and then they're uncomfortable. But I love boating. It's a big, important thing to me. It kind of runs in my blood. My father was a master mariner, boat captain. So I've always been fascinated by boats in the seas. And so this type of law is a perfect fit for me.
This is great. I hope, my dear listeners and viewers, today you've learned as much as I did about the maritime law and common boating, cruise ships, and jet ski injuries. As promised, here's a fun pop question for you, Tom. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
What do you like doing for fun besides boating?
Oh, well, I would say number one thing would be I love to travel. I love to experience different cultures. And I like to eat. I like to try different foods from different parts of the country. So for me, a great vacation combined with great food and relaxation is really awesome. And I'll have you know, interestingly enough, part of the reason I'm so passionate about the cruise line work and the crew work is sociologically and culturally, it's fascinating. On each of these cruise ships, there's a couple thousand different crew members, and they come from all different parts of the world and they work together on these ships. So, for instance, a lot of the navigation and the captains, those guys might be from Italy. The engine guys might be from, Croatia or Serbia. The different people that do different jobs come from different ethnic backgrounds. And I think that is, interestingly enough, one of the most, for me personally, interesting parts about doing the crew cases is I meet people from these fascinating places. And I've even went on vacation and I've met some crew members that I've represented in their hometowns, like Macedonia, Croatia, things like that. So yeah, I love to travel, love to try different restaurants, and I like to read and enjoy life.
That's amazing. Now, if anyone, God forbid, gets injured and is looking for your help and for Mausner Graham Injury Law, how can they reach you? Do you have a website, social media platforms?
Sure, we do have a website, but the best way to reach me, I'm happy to give my cell is area code 412-215-0369, or my email is tom at mginjuryfirm.com.
I love it. That again was attorney Tom Graham with Mausner Graham Injury Law PLLC. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you all for listening to our story today. For more tips and tricks on legal funding and personal injury related law topics, follow me, download, like, and subscribe. For It's Time for More Injury Funding podcast on several podcast platforms, actually worldwide, like Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, iHeart, Google Podcasts, and others. And follow me at More Injury Funding on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Pinterest, YouTube, Yelp, Google Business Profile, and my website at moreinjuryfunding.com. That's with 2 O's. I can't wait to see you, my dear listeners and viewers, at my next upcoming episode. Tune in soon for our next guest. Until then, be well. Thank you so much.